DevilNeverCry.
After what feels like an absolute eternity, we finally have a new update on the Devil May Cry anime, the one that's set to appear on Netflix. Well, it seems as though all is not what you expect. The last time we received an update for the Devil May Cry anime/Netflix show was well over a year ago, so let me briefly refresh your minds and bring you up to speed before talking about what I'm about to dive into today, which is some potentially pretty heavy news. As always, if you want to stay up to date with anything and everything Devil May Cry, leave a like and definitely subscribe, as there's more content on the horizon. This show was announced back in 2018, even before the release of Devil May Cry 5, and it was said to be created or produced by the team behind the Castlevania show that has recently seen a lot of critical acclaim, and of course has recently had a new season announced. Adi Shankar, the producer behind the new Devil May Cry show, confirmed that Virgil and Lady would be making an appearance in this show, and that as early as last year, the script for Season 1 was complete. There was also an implication that multiple seasons were planned for the show, and that they were working closely with Capcom for the story of the show to make sure that it remains true to the canon of the games. Ever since that last update that we had a year ago, we've pretty much heard radio silence, that is until today. Netflix announced that on the 27th of September, they'd be debuting their first ever drop. A virtual showcase, roughly 90 minutes in length, that will feature surprise announcements and never-before-seen sneak peek drops from their most highly anticipated upcoming animated series, including of course the recently announced Castlevania Nocturne. But where we want to turn our attention to is to the asset that they dropped alongside this recent announcement. First and foremost, as you can see front and center in this image, is a big, bold Capcom logo that is just lying there conspicuously. Now, this doesn't necessarily confirm that it's Devil May Cry. After all, Capcom has a slew of different IPs that could translate well or somewhat well to an animated format. For example, we had Dragon's Dogma recently drop, which was a bit of a false start considering most people would have thought Devil May Cry would have dropped first, considering that it was announced 5 years ago at this point. But then our eyes, of course, are immediately averted over towards the big red jacket that is just lying there ominously. Some people have mistaken this jacket as Vash from Trigun's, even though it looks nothing like it if you've seen the newly animated show. Some others have also suggested that the mechanical arm sitting on the table there is eerily reminiscent of Nero's Devil Breaker. Though I don't necessarily see a direct correlation, it is potentially plausible. But we're not here on things that are potentially plausible. We're here about things that are direct references to Devil May Cry making an appearance. So we turn ourselves over to the trailer that recently dropped to coincide with this announcement, and thus we have our answer. During one of the text or title transitions in this trailer, if you pause it at just the right time, you'll see those two guns there on the right hand side. If you've played any of the Devil May Cry games, they might not seem all that familiar, but if you've played the reboot, you'll know them as Ebony and Ivory. Upon initially viewing this trailer, I thought my eyes had honestly deceived me, but after pausing and looking back, this of course 100% is Ebony and Ivory, very recognizable in their distinct shape, and I know I'm not the only one who's made this connection. Several people online have also pointed this out, and I guess this is where it becomes a point of discussion. With Ebony and Ivory here on full display, this is irrefutable proof that a Devil May Cry show is actually happening, and that it hasn't been simply abandoned. On the other hand, however, there is a very real possibility that the show that we'll be getting will be focused on the reboot as opposed to the original series. Some may pull up Adi Shankar's previous statements and how this might be in conflict with what he said in the past, particularly with things like Virgil and Lady, characters of course that are beloved and from the original series, but as is the case with a lot of projects, perhaps plans were changed somewhere along in development. Or it could be a new timeline in the Devil May Cry series altogether. Perhaps we get some mishmash amalgamation where reboot and canon original series combine. Perhaps we just get the standard series, but Dante's just modded Ebony and Ivory to look like they do in the reboot. Who knows, the possibilities are endless. If you want my own personal take on it, I think that the original Devil May Cry continuity is so rich and ripe in its lore and its potential to tell its story in a myriad of ways and so many minute details that you could dive into. I personally think it would be a bit of a shame to focus purely on the reboot. But at the same time, I'm going to remain positive and perhaps refrain from judging the show before we've even had a chance to look at it and sort of digest what it essentially is and could be. And so I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on the matter. Do you agree with some of the conclusions that I've drawn in this video, or do you think I'm wrong entirely? Or perhaps you're even excited at the prospect of this focusing purely on the reboot and skipping the original continuity altogether. Do you think that if this does indeed focus on the reboot, it might actually lead to some interest in perhaps a DMC Devil May Cry 2? The longtime Devil May Cry series director Hideaki Itsuno has mentioned in the past, to paraphrase, that he really wanted to make a DMC Devil May Cry 2 after the release of the initial game, going on to acknowledge that DMC Devil May Cry 2 wasn't the best for his team, stating that he'd have liked to work with Ninja Theory on a proper sequel if he had to. Maybe this show, if it does indeed focus on the reboot, could perhaps relight that fire, and we could see a second reboot enter production. Though, considering Ninja Theory are now owned by Microsoft, I imagine that any sequel that they do potentially plan might have to be with another Western developer, or they might just handle it all in-house entirely. The possibilities are endless, but without knowing what this show exactly is, we can't make an accurate judgment. And so with that, we pretty much come to the end of this video. As mentioned, if you want to stay up to date with anything and everything Devil May Cry, definitely subscribe and give this video a like. With all that said and done, it has been me, DevilNeverCry. I'd like to thank all of you for watching, and as always, I'll see you all next video.